So here we are on another Windows server. This one's called DC1. And let's start by testing layer 3 connectivity with Aura server just to make sure that we can get to it TCP-wise. It looks like we can. I've downloaded the Oracle client binaries. You can do that through the Oracle Technology Network website. I've mentioned to you elsewhere in this course that there are a few Oracle URLs that are must-haves. One is the Oracle University, university.oracle.com. Another one is the documentation, that's tahiti.oracle.com. A third is the Oracle Technology Network site, which is otn.oracle.com. Or you could just as well do a search like I'm going to do now. I did a search for download the Oracle Client Windows, and sure enough, our first result is Instant Client Download for Windows. And you have to create a free login to download their software. You can download it all for free, and we'll talk about this in the installation module actually, but you just want to accept the license agreement assuming you're logged in, and you'll want to download the appropriate client package for your operating system. I'm not on 32-bit Windows, and I actually want the full client, not the instant client. So let me go to the Oracle Database Software Downloads page. I think this is a little bit better, and if we scroll past the database, we can get to the proper location. Tell you what, I will research that and put up a download link. I'll tell you what, friend, I will put up a link on your screen that takes you directly to the proper page for the Oracle client. Jeez, didn't think it would be that complicated, did you? I brought the software down and extracted the contents of the zip file. Let's run setup.exe. This uses the Oracle Universal Installer, as I'm sure comes as absolutely no surprise to you. Here we have our installation type screen. We have Instant Client, and the way these work in the Oracle Universal Installer is that if you hover over an option, you have a little question mark that you can hover over, and it'll tell you a little bit more about what will happen. The Instant Client is still 300 megabytes. What we want to do is install the administrator option that gives us our management consoles and management tools. Look at that, 1.4 gigs. Wow, that's got to be the largest client install I've ever seen. Runtime environment, and then there's custom. Let's next. You only get automatic updates here if you have a support arrangement with Oracle, and I don't, so I have no choice but to choose Skip Software Updates. The next step is choosing the installation product language, which I'll accept and click Next. It asks us who is going to own the Oracle home on the client machine. This should be a non-administrative account. You can use the local Windows service, create a new Windows user, or use an existing user. I'm going to use the Windows built-in service account here. Verify my Oracle base, C app, client, and then whoever the currently logged on user is. You could change that to something more reasonable. Of course, I could also create a user named Oracle to make this more in line with OFA, but this looks good, and Software Home is the Oracle home for the client. Let's click Next. Performing a number of prerequisite checks, checking memory, processor architecture, our path environment variable. Here we have our summary screen. We can save a response file if we want to, otherwise we can click Install to actually kick off the installation. And finally we see the screen that we want to see. The installation of Oracle Client was successful. So let's close out, and the next step of course is to make sure that we can find the Oracle server. I'll click the Start button to come back to the Start screen. Again, instead of looking through all these tiles, why don't I just type net? And this time I'll run Net Configuration Assistant. This, like I said before, is the Java desktop tool that takes us by the proverbial hand in setting up our Oracle client settings. On the welcome screen, let's first do our naming methods. In other words, how are we resolving Oracle service names? We'll click Next, and the default is Local and Easy Connect, which is fine. We're not going to worry about external or directory naming here, so that configuration was easy. Now let's choose Local Net Service Name configuration. It says to access an Oracle database across the network, we need a net service name. We're going to add, that's the only option. Notice that once you have one, you can reconfigure, delete, rename, or test. My service name on the Oracle server is psite.localdomain. We'll click Next. Remember I mentioned that Oracle Net functions over more protocols than just TCP/IP. We're not going to do named pipes or IPC. You could, for security, do TCPS, but we'll do unencrypted TCP. The host name we've already demonstrated is Aura Server, and we use the standard port number of 1521. Let's perform a test here, and it's going to fail initially because of the login. We want to make sure to choose an appropriate login on that target system. So I'll change that login, click OK. Good, that was successful, and that's what we wanted to see. Let's click Next. Enter a name for this net service name. I'll leave that alone at psite. We don't want to configure another net service name, and we're done. Great, so let's finish out of the wizard. I'm going to show you the TNS names file. Let's go to the root of drive C in my app client Oracle product 1210 client 1. That's the Oracle home for the client. Then we'll go to network admin tnsnames.aura, and I'm going to force this guy open in Notepad, my traditional editor. And we see here that psite is the alias. We're going to go to Aura server, TCP port 1521, and we're going to connect to the service name of psite.local domain unless we specify something in our connection string that's different. Let's open up a PowerShell. I might need to do another session here, come to think of it, because I just did an installation. Let me right-click, run as administrator. Let's test connectivity to the remote service, TNS ping, psite. And what you want to look for here, friends, is the last line, OK, and then a measure of latency here. It tells us that we used TNS names to resolve this connect description, and we did get through. So now we can make a connection as we normally would. Let me clear the screen. Just to show comparison and contrast, I'm going to do easy connect here and do my connection string all on one line. I'll do a SQL plus no log to start SQL plus, and then we'll use connect system, and I'm actually going to put in my password here at the name of the server, which is Aura server. We don't need to put in the protocol port if it's the default, but I'm going to do that here for completeness. And then I'll finish with / the service name, and we're connected. Yep, sure enough. So there you have it, a bit on OracleNet in Oracle Database 12c.